Welcome back to episode number 7 of Podcasting on a Plane. It's the beginning of August 2017, and you know what that means. Oshkosh just wrapped up, and first things first, a huge shout out to all the brave controllers there, which for the week is by far the busiest and most complicated airspace and traffic mix in all of the world. Now, unfortunately, things didn't come together for me to make it out there this year, but hopefully next year we can make it happen, and we can get together with all the other great aviation podcasters out there and bring you guys some really good content. But for this episode, other than that, there is positively zero more Oshkosh content. So if you came to hear some, sorry. So things have been really busy for me lately, and it's actually really hard to keep up. But the first bummer is that I couldn't make it out to Oshkosh this year. But I'm sure you've all heard enough of that coverage by now. So the upside, though, of missing Oshkosh is that I've been able to stay home and do a ton of recording here in Southern California. And you can look forward to hearing all of that in the near future. Since we're still early on in the podcast, I'm getting a lot of feedback from you guys about the show's content and the format, and I think we're getting it down to a nice recipe. Subscribers are increasing steadily and our reach is ever growing, and it means a lot to me personally that people are actually liking the podcast. Now, as far as producing it, I'm happy to do it as a labor of love. It's not only fun for me, but I actually find it to be kind of therapeutic, and I'm going to keep doing it as long as people are liking it. A couple of things I found out through making this podcast are that number one, making podcasts takes a lot of time and a lot of decent equipment. And number two, that decent equipment doesn't come cheap. What I've done is I've set up a Patreon page for those of you who would like to elevate their listener status a little bit and help me create the show. Whether you choose to participate in the show in a financial way or not, I'll still keep on recording. Don't worry. But for those of you who decide to become patrons, I would be very, very grateful. And with a little help from listeners, I feel like I can bring you increasingly better content. So for those of you who are willing and able to do so, if you do choose to contribute to the show, I think you should receive something in return. So I've set up a few different levels you can participate in, and they start at just $1 per episode. For that, I'll give you an on-air shout-out and a thank you, of course. And you can interact with me and others through the Patreon website as well. And if you have the means to do it, at the $5 per episode patron level, I'll basically give you tenure on the shout-out list, and I'll mention you each episode. And there's one more level I have set up, and it's a $20 per episode level. And if you choose to participate in that level, you'd receive everything, of course, in the $1 and $5 levels, but I'll be able to offer you some real aviation instruction. I'll give you 30 minutes of, how about loggable ground instruction, or we do it over the phone or FaceTime, or however you want to do it. For those of you who decide to become patrons, where would your contributions go? Well, my first patron goal is to upgrade the website. Now, obviously, we need some room in that department, and I'd like to give you guys an improved website with a lot of really good aviation stuff. And after that, I'd like some better location recording equipment so that I can bring you guys better on-site interviews. Ultimately, though, I'd like to offer a scholarship. I'd like to have a way to help some deserving individuals reach their aviation dreams. Now, I know that working up to that may take some time, but hey, I'm not going anywhere. And so for now, I appreciate your help in reaching these first smaller goals. So, for now, let's get on with the show. Today's episode is really special. I was able to sit down with two of the most influential guys in the Southern California drone scene and have a long talk about pretty much everything UAS related. These guys really know their stuff, and in a part of aviation that's constantly evolving and changing, that's really saying something. Steve and Jeff were eager to share their knowledge with us, and we talked for almost an hour and a half. I hit record, and we were able to capture the whole thing, and I actually ended up doing a little bit of editing, but what you're going to hear is a really candid and enlightening talk. And I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to sit down with these guys. During the discussion, you're going to notice I keep trying to play devil's advocate about a number of different things, but Jeff remains committed to his faith in humanity and that humanity will follow the rules when operating a drone. So I bring up a few points and he keeps shooting me down, but I keep on trying, so I hope you guys enjoy it. And before we get started, just a couple disclaimers. First, this is what I would call like a semi-formal discussion with some very knowledgeable guys, so we try to keep it light, but obviously we each have some opinions on the issues. And secondly, there's a ton of information here, so it's really long. But if you can stay with it, please do. I learned so much during this discussion, I didn't want to cut too much out, and I wanted to give you guys all the content because it's all really good. If it seems a little bit dry at any point, just stick around though, and I promise you're going to learn something. And third, the discussion gets a little specific to San Diego, which is of course where we did the recording, but it's applicable pretty much anywhere. So enough talk from me, let's start learning about drones. All right, so we're here at an undisclosed location at an airport in San Diego. Let's leave it at that. And we have a couple special guests today named Steve and Jeff, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves and state what their titles are because I'm definitely going to mess it up. But what they are is they are experts in drones, or UASs, as I should say. And as we all know, that's becoming, there's a proliferation of that type of activity. in our nation's skies now ever since last Christmas and maybe the one before it. So if you can go down to Best Buy and pick up a real nice drone for $600, go down to the park and start flying it, well, that's fun. But the FAA probably has a couple things they'd like to say about it. So today we have, again, our guests, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and we're going to talk all about drones and what it means to you. So, Steve, why don't you go first? Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brandon. Steve, I'm now an inspector with the FAA. I have FAST team or safety team oversight with over 70 volunteers in the San Diego area. The various team members all have their different specialty interests depending on the kind of aircraft and flying that they like to do. And it's our pleasure to welcome the SUAS or drone aviator into our environment. My job is to help with education and outreach throughout San Diego and to welcome the new aviators into our environment and help them do it safely and legally.
All right, thanks, Steve. And Jeff, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Sure. I'm one of Steve's many volunteers. I volunteer with the FAA safety team, and our specialty is unmanned aircraft systems. And as such, we provide the volunteer outreach education to the public. We do a monthly seminar free on the topic of drone safety, proper aviation. We cover topics for both recreation, commercial, even talk about some of the public aircraft use sometimes. And of course, we survey and always try to be topical. And that's one of the things you don't have to worry about too much in the drone industry about change. Every 30 days, you've always got a brand new topic to talk about. It's a pretty exciting and emerging and exploding industry and bringing a lot of life back into the aviation industry, I believe.
That sounds like a lot of fun and a lot to keep up with. So that's part of at least one of the things I think we should probably talk about then is the FAA has a job to do, and it has a lot of jobs to do. And I think that managing all of the drones in the sky would be a huge and onerous thing for any one government organization to handle. So I know that in my limited knowledge of this, there's been a shift, not just in UAS activity, but in several things towards experts in private industry to sort of take the lead on how we're going to regulate new things so that the FAA doesn't have to just have a single-handed, I don't know what the right word is, maybe method or a single-handed way of having to handle literally everything that happens in the sky everywhere, or at least coaching the FAA and helping the FAA develop a way to regulate that. Would that be fair, Steve?
The posture, I think the best way to describe the posture the FAA takes is, nobody likes rules. So if we can have an activity or flying event that doesn't require onerous rules, the public will be satisfied. Rules were made because of certain situations that made it necessary to have that rule in place. Instead, the posture that I think is more effective is to have responsible, intelligent, educated airmen knowing how to operate safely. You have to have the big picture. You've got to know how you fit into the system. There's more and more traffic in the air now, and the biggest thing that we're all interested in and concerned about is that they don't collide with each other. So how do we keep drones from colliding with airliners, with first responders like fire, medical situations, keeping them separated? That's the challenge. And I think it's a very positive thing that the FAA is looking at education outreach as the probably most effective way of doing that, and that way we don't have to write rules.
That sounds good. And as you're talking, I think you just described what my job normally is. Anyway, okay, so how, maybe tell us a little bit about how you got involved, Steve, in this, at least on behalf of the FSDO here at first, and then take us maybe through how things have evolved and changed up to this point.
Well, my own exposure goes way back as a kid. 1954, I started flying model aircraft. Those were unmanned vehicles. I'm also an early fly-by-wire. If you're an airline guy or something, that means something if you're flying modern-day Boeing or Airbus type of equipment. They call that fly-by-wire. For me, it was U-controlled airplanes, the ones, 2 wires where you're going around in a circle. And that's how I got started. I taught myself how to fly when I was 8 years old. And I've been in model aviation now, what does that add up to? 63 years, I think, something like that. That got me a foot in the door where I was able to realize my full-scale flying dream. Went through all the different ratings, worked my way up until I secured a job with a major airline. Retired at that when you hit the magic 60 at those days. That was automatic retirement. So that for me occurred in 2006. And shortly thereafter, I decided to go ahead and take a look at the FAA when you're a pilot in any activity that you do, you have interaction with the FAA. That's just part of it. So I had established some friendships in the GATO, FSDO. GATO was General Aviation, and now we have the flight standards. So the GATO changed to a FSDO. I was renewing my flight instructor certificate at the FSDO and happened to talk to the inspector about securing a job. There was openings, and so I went ahead and threw my hat in the door. So I've been in the FAA now for 11 years since my retirement from my airline. The modeling has always been part of me. I'm very, very involved with that. Drones kind of caught my attention about 13 years ago. I got my Parrot drone, flying it with my iPhone. That was kind of my entry level. Since got my DJI Phantom 4, and that's what I'm operating. Got my remote pilot certificate, my 107 certificate, as did most inspectors here in the FAA. And kind of watched the fledgling new interest growing by leaps and bounds. This was opening up doors to people in the public who have not been otherwise involved in model aviation or full-size flying, but they wanted to be able to operate the drone. They're simple, they're relatively inexpensive, they're fun, and so we've got just this floodgates of people that are coming in now and wanting to operate these things. First thing you're going to do is probably try to do it in your front yard or in your backyard or at your local park, and I think most of the new people are completely oblivious to their proximity next to an airport, whether or not they're in a beach route where aircraft or helicopters might be flying up and down, not thinking about whether you're located underneath the approach corridor or departure corridor at an airport. And so it has some growing pains. FAA is trying to figure out how to best welcome this new group into our airspace system. And that's an ongoing situation that we're trying to work out right now. In the last 3 or 4 years, I guess, we've seen the proliferation of drone activity on the increase by leaps and by bounds. And the FAA office the phone is ringing constantly on how can I safely operate my drone. So that's kind of my background and my observations about where we're at this point, and now how are we going to move forward? That's the challenge.
So how are we going to move forward?
Well, we're moving forward whether we like it or not. So the drone industry is not going to shrink. Obviously, the opportunities and the kind of flying that can be done are limitless. The kinds of engineering that I'm seeing and the kind of people that want to fly these things, it's amazing. The opportunities, thermal imaging, agriculture, see and avoid. I can't even, my mind is just flooded with all of the different opportunities. Jeff may be able to express that even better because he's active in the industry. But every time I turn around and see somebody's new idea, the Amazon thing, the UPS thing, package delivery. That's just one aspect of it. But there's just so many opportunities. But it's coming, ready or not. Here it comes.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's have that be a good segue into talking with Jeff here. And Jeff, you're kind of one of the people in the industry that's helping transition this new technology into being a reality for so many people, and then how we're going to integrate that into the national airspace system. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work to help out with that?
Sure. I come from a totally different side of this from Steve, because I wasn't born with a desire to aviate, and I think I got one of those wire planes when I was about 8 years old and crashed it and figured I wasn't gifted in aviation, and picked up a baseball bat and did some other things in life. But my brother and I are entrepreneurs. We're always involved in interesting business ventures. I've taught college for several years at Mesa College as an adjunct with business law. We represent Native American tribes. And we were looking for an opportunity. And in 2014, the drones just kept popping up as a topic of interest. And clearly it was dominating the media space. And looking into it, there was no clear pathway of how to do that. At that particular time, there were only 14 approved companies by the FAA nationally to operate unmanned aircraft in national airspace. And there were about 400 applicants pending, and they'd been pending for quite a while, and that made it curious to me as to why. And in looking into that, you could see that their FAA was understaffed, underfunded, but under congressional mandate to integrate drones by September of 2015, and now this is December of 2014, and it's probably not going to get done, but something's got to get done. So we decided to go ahead and kind of take a flyer, spend about 6 months investigating, go around to a couple manufacturers, look into the industry, educate ourselves, saw an opportunity. I got 7 or 8 students out of my business law class at Mesa as interns, and we started a company called Empower UAV. And in that process, we went through the FAA 333 section approval, because that was the only way you could legally operate. And we decided we were going to operate legal and safe. And in that process, we had an opportunity to do some filming in Coronado. And in looking at the rules, we were trying to decide if we were recreational or commercial, and we couldn't decide. So I figured, well, I might as well call the tower or the airport and ask them what's up, and notify them at least. And every avenue led back to Steve over at FSDO, because he was the drone guy at the time, right? Because he inherited that title from his RC experience. Steve's a little modest on that. He's probably got over 20 RC fixed-wing planes that he's been flying. He does aerobatics with them. He knows RC in and out better than I probably will ever know, even though, we operate commercially. So from that, we started a company in 2015, secured our Section 333, and I became acquainted with Steve and his efforts, and we kind of struck up a conversation. And out of that, Steve invited us to be part of the inaugural meeting in December of 2015 of about 15 professionals and recreational RC flyers that Steve knew and various aviators, and we started an FAA flight safety team or safety team with a specific task of helping to educate people with UAS. That's been quite a task, but since then we went through and did guest speaking at various organizations and opportunities. And as Steve can better describe than I can, there's a proven process to build education in aviation. So right from the beginning, when we started our company, it's, okay, there's no other UAS company to model after because it's a brand new industry, but hey, you know what? FAA has done a really good job of keeping people safe in the air for a long time. Why don't we just model ourselves after a commercial manned aviation company and do everything just like they do and work at that same standard? Because we figured the new rule would come in and it would be pretty restrictive on who could operate commercially and who was recreational. Well, as 107 came out, the bar was pretty low and just about anybody can operate commercially, but we've maintained that standard. And then through the process, we started the monthly seminar, just as all FAA safety teams hopefully are doing. And our specific topic is drone safety at both the recreational and at the commercial level. And in that process, I'd be a bit of a hypocrite if I didn't understand the rules, regulations, and practice them out in the field. And that's kind of how Steve and I've got to know each other, and how we've kind of gone out, do some things together and to help educate the public. And believe me, it's not easy to fly safe. It's not easy to fly legal. And I guess if there was one message that I'd like to get across to the listeners is, regardless of what your experience is, if you're flying unmanned aircraft, you're an aviator. And you have responsibilities for other aircraft in the sky, and be aware of what's beneath you. Because there are things beneath you. And I can quickly kind of just give the listeners maybe a little tip of how I go through that. Because if a person calls and says, hey, can I operate my drone here? First thing I've got to ask is, well, what's your purpose, recreational or commercial? Because depending on that answer, I've got a different set of rules. Recreation is Part 101, commercial is Part 107. So until I can determine that, I don't know which way to go. If they say recreational under Part 101, well, are you operating under a community safety standard? Are you using AMA rules or some other standard of rules? And in those rules, it will say don't fly over people, right? It'll say maintain a safe altitude. It'll say maintain line of sight. If you say I'm recreational and I don't have rules, that's not true. You have less rules, but you do have rules. Maintain line of sight, avoid aircraft, and the one that we started talking about, if you're within 5 statutory miles of an aerodrome, you need to notify the airport and the airport tower if they're operational. Then, if you're not recreational and you're commercial, you've got a whole different set of rules, and that gets a lot more complicated, and we do the seminars to cover both sides.
Let's have you, Jeff, tell us a little bit about, after all that, there was some sort of vocabulary I wanted to circle back to. So for people who don't know, you talked about Section 333, you talked about Parts 101 and 107, which are, of course, the parts of the regs that talk about what purpose you're using drones. You said 101 is for just recreational use, and then 107 is for commercial. How does somebody know which part they fall under?
That's a good question, and the answer comes in a 60-some page document from the FAA that interprets the regulation, and it gives you some specific language and interpretation in that. And it starts with the clear definition from Merriam-Webster that says, is the activity purely for recreational, refreshment, enjoyment purposes? And this is kind of interesting to me because the dichotomy of the challenge here is we've got RC flyers that have been flying for 50, 60, 70, 80 years, essentially unregulated, safe, with no problem. So why do we have a problem now? Well, because we have all the droners coming in that weren't RC pilots, and they can fly these because of the technology allows them to do this without having any aviation experience. Okay.
Yeah, the thing that I always think about with this versus RC airplanes, like what's the difference, right? Well, when I think of an RC airplane, I have to stand there, and I've done this too. Of course, I own several RC aircraft, and you say I want to go fly at a park or a model airplane field. Well, I have to be line of sight with it, because if I can't see it, I can't control this thing. Mm-hmm. But most of these drones now, even surprisingly cheap ones, I think I saw one with an FPV camera for like $100 on Amazon. So you can now remotely operate something that I could be sitting in my kitchen flying this thing around an airport completely remotely and not line of sight. So if you can have even maybe a small child just sitting in the backyard and flying something that could be conceivably miles away, how are we going to? I mean, that to me seems like the big difference between RC airplanes versus a drone is just that capability of remote operation. Would you agree?
No, because to be legal and be recreational, you need to maintain line of sight.
Okay.
So first-person view doesn't work unless you have a spotter, in my opinion, but I'll defer to the expert over here, Steve, on the rules on that one.
Well, let me kind of point out the difference between models, a model airport, being a member of a model club. As I grew up, there were times, sure, when I flew my small free flight gliders or hand launch gliders, and I would take those out to the local park and throw them in the sky and go have a good time. As the planes got bigger and the engines got more powerful, it became incumbent upon me to fly at a recognized model airport. A piece of land that was set aside by an owner where a group of flyers would get together and organize. We would build a runway. We had pits. We had parking areas. We had fly zones and no-fly zones. We made sure we kept our dead line or our crowd control line separated so that all the spectators and the operators were on one side of the line and all the flying was over on another side of the line. It was very organized. The landowner normally required some form of liability insurance. We did that through the AMA, the American Academy of Model Aeronautics, and that gave us liability protection. And we had permission to operate there. If we were within 5 miles of an airport, it was incumbent upon the club to notify and have an agreement in place with the airport operator. So it didn't say you couldn't fly there, there just had to be an agreement in place. So the club would get together with that airport and work out either a telephone activation method or have a telephone contact or something that we could communicate with each other. As modeling, we entered a phase in the model airplane world maybe 10, maybe 12 years ago where we got into things that are called foamies and very, very light equipment now. They even titled them park flyers. Now the owner-operators of these didn't even necessarily have to be a club member. They could just buy these things. They were called ready-to-fly equipment, and they could go down to their local park and operate these things. It was up to the landowner whether they wanted to do anything about it. Park flyers were relatively light and very, very low risk, so even if you did have an accident and hit the dog walking party that just went through the park on their normal Sunday morning walk, usually there was minimal damage and usually not too much of a issue about claims or anything like that. But as these park flyers got bigger, that became an issue, and about that same time, enter the drone. So both of those kind of started to flood the parks and the non-model airport environment, and the inexperienced or untrained user was starting to fly these things in and around and very, very close to airports. So that's where things got kind of interested and kind of exciting.
Yeah, if I can jump in there real quick, the technology that created the rotorcraft with auto hover, GPS lock, is really the technology that opened this up to the floodgates, because now you didn't have to go to an RC park to launch land. You have vertical takeoff and landing. It's much easier to fly a rotorcraft that has auto hover than it is a fixed wing that you got to keep moving in the air all the time. But again, I defer to Steve as the expert on that. And then now you put the camera on it, right? And the camera changes the game, because the images you're capturing with that camera means you're not just out there flying for the enjoyment of flying. Now, what are you doing with those images? And that circles back to answer the question you initially asked, is how you distinguish between recreational and non-recreational. And if you're using those images for anything that's ancillary, connected to a business purpose, anything that has a nexus, meaning a legal connection, regardless of whether you're getting paid for it or not now, is not recreational. Therefore, you need to be Part 107, FAR Part 107, as opposed to FAR Part 101. 101's recreational, and it's real short and simple and sweet, but it's not as simple as it may read, because, again, you need to be a part of a community safety guideline pattern under a national organization. And you should be getting that from your local RC park. And our recommendation is, how do I get in the business? Join the AMA, join your local RC park, get some instruction. That's the best way to start. Then start investigating and find somebody that's operating safe and see if you can tag along with them. Come to our seminars, and I can give you a whole volume of information you need to start reading, because the Part 107 is a lot more detailed, a lot more specific. But when you become a 107 certified pilot, I don't know doesn't get you off the hook anymore. You're supposed to know you're certified.
Okay, so just to play devil's advocate then, that sounds like a huge pain. And I want to just stop by Best Buy after this, and I'm all stoked on drones now. And I'm just going to go buy a Parrot. I saw one there for $600 with an FPV camera. And I just want to go buy that and go fly it, right? And then I'm probably going to put it on my YouTube channel, and I'm going to put out all kinds of stuff there, and maybe I'll enable the ads on it. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure that this drone I'm going to buy, it doesn't have that 60-page document in it. And I'm even more sure that any 16-year-old kid that went down to Best Buy or that asked for this for Christmas and got one is probably not interested in joining a model airplane club or calling the FAA, or there is an app you can download. You might want to do that. But other than that, all that background, that just sounds like an awful lot of work, and to the point where it would be demotivational, and there's going to be a ton of people that just go out, play dumb, as you stated, and just fly anyway. What are your thoughts? And I guess this is a question for both of you. What are your thoughts on that as a reality scenario?
You got.
Go ahead, Steve. Well, I would say, I can only speak from my own personal experience on that one, because as a businessman and as a person, who wants to be a responsible citizen, I have a responsibility to do it correctly. And if I play ignorant, sure, that might get me through one time, but I can't only claim ignorance once. And so education, I think, is the FAA's proper approach, in that if they have infractions and they're first-timers, they're going to get educated. But after that, then I think there's going to be consequences. And that leads to, well, what are the consequences? Well, there may be some from FAA as the federal government, but more than likely it's going to be local consequences, because most jurisdictions, cities, are now authorizing their local law enforcement to enforce the FAA rules. You may have seen the situation where the guy flew his drone over the top of Qualcomm, crashed it in the upper deck during a Sunday afternoon game. Well, I'm not sure what the consequences are from FAA for that incident, but I know that the city of San Diego is pursuing some civil penalties on it. So, I think the enforcement's going to come local. And it'll come fairly swift after a round of incidents where people can claim ignorance. But again, ignorance can only work for you once. The liability issues are huge on this. If that drone had hit somebody instead of an empty seat, it changes it from a civil infraction to a potentially criminal infraction. And there are cases around the country, just Google it, and you'll see that people are getting felony charges for flying a drone in a fire, felony charges for hitting a person while they were flying over people in a parade. It's happening. Just don't let it happen to you.
Well said. Now, how well educated would you say the local law enforcement is regarding this?
It's kind of unknown at this point. The FAA has written a letter to law enforcement. They did that a year and a half ago for distribution, but I'm not sure that it's actually getting out there. The city of San Diego did enhance their ordinances to try to empower at least the San Diego Harbor Patrol and the San Diego Police in their ability to approach an operator and determine what their status is and whether or not they should be there. Depending on where the operator falls on the 101 or 107 category, the police are then empowered to be able to do something about it. All brand new stuff. Hasn't really been exercised to my knowledge or implemented, but it's available. That's our latest new tool. I'd like to emphasize a little bit about what Jeff said about the liability issue. There's other entities that have a place in this, and that is courts, legal systems, landowners, property owners, and people of that nature that do impact our world. I have carried an umbrella policy most of my adult life in case one of my toys hurts somebody. I'm aware of my liability risk, particularly in California, because we're heavily populated by attorneys and they love the lawsuit process. So anybody who's operating one of these things, you've got a bullseye on your back, and the size of your estate affects the size of that bullseye. So I will emphasize the liability side of it, and the court side of it is probably a bigger deterrent than even the FAA is. So that's why you want to do it legally, Jeff. I applaud Jeff for his position and stance on trying to do it the right way, but you've also got some legal things. The part of this that hasn't been talked about yet that is emerging on the front page of all your papers is the privacy issue. You've got airspace issues. That's FAA. We're the ones responsible for keeping hard bodies from contacting each other. You've got surface jurisdiction, and that's going to go to landowners, property owners, city owners, county, state, public parks. They're going to be dealing with whether or not you can fly off of there, because they've got liability. If they knowingly allow you to operate there and don't say something about it, they can get drawn into lawsuit situations. So a lot of times they'll just avoid the conflict by saying you can't fly here, and they can perfectly enforce that. They're the landowner, so you can't even take off and land on their property. Let's see. I think.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that because you know, when we first started talking about this, and this person says, "Well, where can I fly?" Well, the first thing we got to ask is, what's your purpose, right? Is this recreational or non-recreational? And that determines the rules. Am I using the rules in my left hand or the rules in my right hand? Okay, well, the second issue now is I know which rules. What airspace am I in? Do I have permission to fly in this airspace, or do I need to notify somebody in this airspace, right? Second issue on my hand there, I'm looking at fingers, right? 5 fingers I'm going to go through. First finger, airspace. Second finger, do I have a landowner permission to fly here, or are there any trespass issues that I got to be concerned about? 3, now what are the privacy concerns? Because when I'm up in the air here, I've got to be concerned about other people that are wondering what I'm doing. So we fly a lot of times a vertical column up to a certain altitude and operate at that altitude, which is public domain. Sometime we can talk about that whole genesis of how that happened, but we don't want any privacy issues to concern. And then we're going to go to our fourth factor, which is risk, right? What are the telephone poles? Where's the wind? Where's the, things that we got to watch out for? If there's people there, we're not going to fly over people. We got to start developing a flight plan. And then the fifth is weather, because we're going to watch weather, right? Then we have a whole set of protocols when we get out to the area. We're going to notify the landowner. We're going to see if there's anybody around watching. We're going to tell them. I go a lot of times go a day or two in advance, and I'll tell the neighbors, hey, we're going to be flying drones over here in a couple of days. So when you see it, don't call San Diego police. We have an airspace authorization, and I've got insurance and blah, blah, blah. So a little bit of forethought that. If you're a recreational flyer and you got a favorite place to fly, check it out. What's my airspace? Who's around that I need to be concerned about with permission? Because I don't know if most people know this, but in San Diego, we have a no drone ordinance for San Diego County parks. For most San Diego city parks, we do not have a no drone zone, but if you're going to capture images, you need a film permit, right? So there are processes to go through this, even for recreational flyers. But recreational flyers, again, find a place you like to fly. What's the easiest place to fly? An RC park. It's already got the permissions, right? So, but if you don't and you've got some place else you want to fly, go through the same steps, the same protocol. What's my purpose? What's my airspace? What do I need to do to get permission? Are there any privacy issues? For example, if there's a school around, we're going to put our flight boundary, several hundred feet short of that school, because anybody's going to come along and say, why are you flying over that school, right? Well, I don't want to be flying over the kids, and I don't want to be somebody wondering why we're taking pictures there of kids. That's kind of silly. You're attracting problems you don't need. So be a good citizen and have some kind of checklist that you operate from, and do a little planning in advance. It saves a lot of heartaches.
Well, let's talk about that planning a little bit. As you were talking, many of those things seem like common, or maybe I should say uncommon sense, but there was one that you touched on that I think would probably be fair to say that most people do not understand, and fairly so, and that would be the National Airspace System. What kind of airspace am I in? And Steve, you talked about this earlier. You said, what's my proximity to an airport? Well, most people, I feel like, that are not pilots don't realize that you could be several miles from an airport and still be very, very much relevant to that airport, because a couple miles to an airplane is nothing. So how would one go about finding out their proximity to an airport and what type of airspace they're in, and then go about getting the permissions required to fly in that kind of airspace?
Again, I'll probably lead off with that, because Steve will talk about how a manned airman will do this with ForeFlight and air charts and all the proper ways. And certainly if anybody's going to be a professional in unmanned, I suggest they take private pilot ground school and human factors in aviation and learn to do the same thing the way an airman does it. But there are technology now that the FAA has developed to be our friendly tools for people that don't have that extent to be able to read an air chart. And so if you just Google FAA Visualize UAS, you will see there's an interactive chart. You type in the address that you want to fly, it will take you to that location. You left click, and it will tell you the airspace surface up. It'll give you a little index you can click on, and then it'll highlight all of the nodes, fly zones, because it'll give you the military restricted areas. And you can layer this. You can do B airspace, you can do C, you can do E, you can do the various E's. But within a short little tutorial, and the instructions are pretty clear, a person can learn fairly quickly about how to manage airspace, or at least know what airspace they're in from the Part 107 perspective. So you only really need to know the classification of airspace if you're in Part 107 or you're a commercial operator. If you're a recreational operator in Part 101, you need to know the proximity to the airport, right? In that case, I'd say go to your Google Maps, drop a pin on the middle of the airport, and go to your location and measure it. And if it's within 5 statutory miles, you need to get the phone number and call them. Right? So there are real practical ways to do it, and it really doesn't take very long once you've done it once or twice. You had a little guide show you. Come to our seminars, I'll be happy to show you. Anybody that comes to the seminars, I always say, give me a call, I'll spend an hour with you, buy me a cup of coffee, and I'll help you with whatever challenge you're facing right now. But just realize it's just one challenge of many.
All right, what's it? Okay, well, to that point, as you were talking, I did just get out my phone and look this up on the internet, and it comes up with an interesting I'm not going to read this URL because it's very, very long. UAS
That's
FAA.
Why I don't do it that way either.
Exactly. No, but okay, so it says welcome to the FAA's UAS data delivery system, and it looks kind of fun. I could click through this, I guess, and get a whole bunch of information. It actually seems pretty simple. But are there any apps or something I could download to my phone that would sort of consolidate all this information together?
Well, that again is an app I believe you can download to your phone that's very practical for a 107 non-recreational operator. Now, if you're a recreational 101, you would download the it's not GoFly, it's Before You Fly.
Before You Fly.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve, if you want to address that a little bit, because
Yeah, that's it.
yeah, just go to your webpage at faa.gov/UAS, and it'll have the app to download for Before You Fly. Before You Fly is a recreational app for where you're flying and knowing your airspace to as per airports and notifying. But for a 107 operator, go to the Visualize It FAA UAS site and know specifically whether you're in B, C, D, or E ancillary to an airport.
All right, that sounds fair. And again, I've actually already downloaded this app. I knew that it existed, but if I didn't, I could get this one, and it actually looks pretty good. The second I opened it up, it already knew where I was, and it says you are within 5 miles of an airport. Warning, action is required. And then it asks me how high I'm going to fly, how far I'm going to fly, and how long I'm going to fly here. Then there's a little tab for map. It says it's loading the location data. Oh, there we are. And it's actually showing a lot of different airspace around here. And then there's another part that says planner, so I can enter where my future flight info and even the time. And it says planner mode lets you check flight requirements and restrictions for a specified time and location. Okay, so this app looks like a really good place to start.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if I were to go down to Best Buy and buy a drone right now, is there like a little card or something in there that's actually going to tell me that this app exists?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Well, I can. When I bought my DJI Phantom 4 back in November, I was surprised at how the tutorials, as you open it up and you get the simple diagram, it references this app, and it references going to FAAsafety.gov and the FAA UAS website. I didn't fly my drone for at least 4 days. I studied it. I did the tutorials. I examined all of the recommendations, and over and over and over again, it recommended airspace and how to get myself up to speed. So anybody who's even semi-diligent and spends some time with those tutorials, at least in the DJI world, they did a good job of getting you started in the right direction and getting you briefed before you did your flying. I have to think that most of the manufacturers now are probably doing the same thing. So I would not, like most men do, when we get something, we usually throw away the construction manual and just start to put it together, and we see how many bolts and things we got left over when we're all done, and then we go back to the book and see what it is that we forgot. In this case, I would recommend against that. Spend some time, take advantage of the tutorials. The manufacturers are doing their part, so as an operator, you've got a responsibility to do your part, do your homework.
One of the things which I always find interesting is our friends down at the DJI store, and of course DJI is the largest manufacturer of aircraft out there, unmanned aircraft. So they got a pretty good handle on it, and almost 50% of their reported accidents come between the week of Christmas and New Year's. Because people get the Christmas present, they open it up, they do the exactly opposite of what Steve just suggested, and they go out and fly, and they have an incident on their first, second, or third outing. And once they get past that, they weather that, they either learn, I need to go back and do the tutorials, right? So it kind of reminds me of the old analogy. If a 95-year-old pilot tells you to do something, you probably should do it, because there's a reason why he's 95 and a pilot. He survived.
What's the old saying there? There are old pilots and there are bold pilots, but there are no old, bold pilots. Mm-hmm. Unless you're hanging out with a group up in Oceanside called the Old Bold Pilots, and those guys are awesome, by the way. So as people continue to buy and buy drones, and more of these things are out there, let's talk about, as Steve alluded to earlier, about how, at the FAA, of course, one of the main jobs is to keep things from hitting each other, right? And that's what I get up in the morning and spend my day doing. And I'm happy to do it, but I'll tell you what, these drones, I don't see them on radar. They're not there. And as a tower controller, yes, I have a set of binoculars and some very beautiful large windows that I look out, but a drone can be smaller than a bird, and birds are hard enough to see. And if you're talking about a guy flying a drone a mile away from me, frankly, I'm probably not going to see it. So what efforts are being made, and this is a question for both of you, about how to integrate drones into the airspace system itself, particularly when they're in close proximity to an airport?
Why don't you let me kick it off, and then I'll give it to you, Jeff, for your expertise. What they have done recently is establish the facility maps. That stands for the tower, especially all the control towers that have people communicating with the pilots. And around each airport environment, they've established little grids where they've put in acceptable maximum altitude where UAS can operate. Usually alongside and parallel to the runways, not involved in the approach or departure path. Higher altitudes for a drone operator could be permissible and acceptable. As you get around in front of or behind the ends of the runway, for both the approach and the departure, obviously the closer an airliner gets to the runway, the lower they're going to be. So if you're 4 or 5 miles off the end of the runway, you might be able to actually operate at 400 or 500 foot and not impact traffic at all. But as you get closer to the end of the runway, say within a half a mile or a mile, you're going to have to drop those altitudes for maximum operation lower, maybe even down to zero. It's a learning curve for all of us. ATC and FAA and the operators all need to have a little patience here while we learn how to coexist. And how high can a drone fly without impacting aviation? That's the challenge, and we want to be conservative. We certainly don't want to put an airman at risk of hurting their equipment or the people on board. So, admittedly, most drones that you would buy out of Best Buy or something, or Amazon, are probably going to be 4 or 5 pounds or less. The risk is relatively low. Impact with one of these things is kind of unknown. There's been some testing going on, but nothing is definitive yet. But certainly we have a little time and room here to kind of experiment with it. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff because he's a little more involved with the facility maps, and let me hand that off to you and what you guys have been doing as you get approval for operating here.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. On the UAS facilities map, and they abbreviate UASFM, that was mandated because when you're in controlled airspace as a commercial operator, so again, we're talking about Part 107 now, commercial, not recreational, you really need to know the airspace. And if that airspace is controlled by a tower, you have to apply to get permission to fly in that airspace around that tower, and it's only normal. Well, you can imagine how many drones and operators are around airports across the country, and now air traffic control is going to have this challenge of watching the airspace and keeping it safe with all the drones flying. But unfortunately, we haven't given them the funding or the manpower to take care of that additional workload. So in order to try to accommodate, the FAA has taken technology and made it their friend, and they've put a web portal. So all non-recreational operators now receive airspace authorization through a web portal. You submit it, and then your request is analyzed against this facilities map for your 107.41 airspace authorization. Airspace authorization shouldn't be confused with 107.41 airspace waivers. That's a different process, different thing. Waivers have no bearing, or I should say facilities maps have no bearing on waivers, but facility maps are the dictating determinative grid that on whether you're going to get your airspace authorization or not. So initially, these were formulated by the various facilities, meaning the towers, and submitted to Washington and did through some kind of a wash and rinse, and they start accepting applications and processing. So I got to hand it to the FAA because the visualized map that we were talking about just a few minutes ago is really a useful tool, and it's great technology to put to use. And you can see that within a short period of time here, it's going to have the kinks worked out, and it's going to be automated where you can get your approvals in a short period of time. We just have to be patient to work it out because this is a huge challenge with very little funding and very little manpower, so we got to use technology. So if you're a manned aviator, you're not going to get your drone or your UAS approval by calling the tower and talking to your friend that's been there to give you airspace approval in your manned operations all this time. And don't expect him to, because that's unfair. You're asking too much of your tower operator now to give you authorization to fly a drone in that airspace, because that's beyond his authorization or his authority. You got to go through the web portal just like everybody else. Well, on this map that the FAA has created, and now they're publishing these facilities maps, so go on and look at the facilities map and see what the airspace authorization approval is for your space. That will be determinative for your commercial operations. But hey, I'm a recreational flyer. Why wouldn't I do the same thing and see what's safe? Because if the tower guy says, I don't want a professional flying there above 200 feet, do you think a recreational guy's safe flying above 200 feet there? Well, there's no mandated rule. I'm just saying let's use a little common sense here. The tools are available there, and certainly they're determinative for a commercial flyer, but they're only suggestive for a recreational flyer, but we can learn and coexist at the same time, right? So the facilities maps are a work in progress, but they are something that is a guideline to help us know what we can do and what we can't do as commercial operators. And again, they should be suggestive for recreational flyers as well.
Well, you're speaking my language as you say that, because I was involved in the work group at my facility for making that map. And, you know, we take into account an awful lot of information, you know, where the altitudes are. Obviously, the closer to the airport, the lower, or possibly no, you can't without some sort of authorization. And then the further out we go, then okay. But the sort of X factor that a lot of people who are not pilots wouldn't understand is that just because you're not aligned with a runway center line, like the approach or departure path, as people would refer to it, at my airport, we have a VOR alpha approach, right? Which is just an approach that comes from a nav aid that's about 10 miles away and hits the airport at a 45-degree angle. And then based on the runway in use, pilots will have to circle to land based on the conditions. So it wouldn't make sense that if somebody's flying up at 10 miles away, or maybe even 5 or 6, and not directly aligned with the runway or the general way that they see airplanes flying over, why wouldn't I let them fly more than 100 or 200 feet up? And the answer is very simple, because there actually is an approach there that's just not aligned with a runway. But it would obviously be unreasonable to expect your average person buying a drone to know those types of things. So these maps, I think, are a very good idea, because that way it's very simple for anybody to see in a graphical, pictorial means of where they are and what the tower is going to allow you or not allow you to do. But then, of course, you're absolutely right. You know, right now, at my facility, we're getting somewhere between, on an average day, I'd say 5 and 10 calls from UAS operators that want to, usually recreational, that want to fly in our airspace. And usually it's not a big problem. It's usually, I'd say 4 or 5 of them are the same 4 or 5 guys almost every day. And they usually fly around the sunset, and then that's about it. And on weekends, we get a few more, of course. But the trick is when somebody calls you and they say, hey, look, I want to fly my drone over here. They give you their coordinates. I sometimes even pull up a Google map and look at it. That takes effort. Somebody has to take the time to look at that if they're not already familiar with that intersection that they're describing. So, if we're busy working live traffic, then if there's another staff person to do that job, that would make the most sense. But if we're busy, I can't approve that at all, or I'm not even going to be able to answer the phone to talk to you about it. And then when it comes to the word approve, I don't know of a single controller that wants to go out there and say, hey, yes, I so-and-so approve what you're doing right now, right? That is very, very uncomfortable. And the FAA, I'm sure, does not want that either. Not at all. So when you call, you tell me where you are, what you want to do, and then I, of course, take down a bunch of information, your phone number, the time, and I want you to call me when you're done and things like that. But at no time do I say, okay, or I approve that. It's just, that's kind of the end of the conversation, and we log it and keep track of it. So that can sometimes be a little bit uncomfortable just it's a phone call that has kind of no end to it. It just, you're informing me that you're doing something. So this graphical means of letting people do that in an automated way, I think, is very nice. And then again, it clears up the phone ringing at the tower that nobody, for instance, has the time.
Not really. Your recreational people are still going to call on the phone. The web portal is only for the commercial operators.
Okay.
So I would highly recommend that the recreational flyers be prepared. In fact, if people want to email me, I'll send them a little form that says, fill out these 6 things.
Okay.
Have it ready before you call the tower so you don't waste their time. Your name, your location, the nature of your operation, what altitude you're flying, kind of the radius of what you're flying, when you plan to take off, when you plan to leave. Here's my phone number. That's about as basic as it gets. But have that prepared, because that's what the tower guy, well, you're the tower guy. Is that what you want to?
Exactly. No, that is more or less, that is the information that we need. And, and maybe those people would want to know what the response back is going to be, because I've had a couple times somebody will call and I more or less just say, that's nice, have a good day. But at no point do I say, that's approved, or you go do that. That just doesn't happen. And I'm not going to say that. And so it can get a little, I think, confusing. I had one guy ask, and I had a guy ask, so is it okay? I don't know what to say back to that. You informed me of what you're doing in this area, and that's kind of the end of it, right?
I suggest that as the controller, you can say that you've got the information, and this is your back and forth opportunity to ask any questions that you have. If you have a problem with the flight, then you need to express clearly why you have a problem with it. If he's in the final approach course too close to the end of the runway, that would be a legitimate reason for denying him to fly. But no, a controller or any FAA person, we don't approve or accept anything. The operator is the one liable. So you must make sure that you are following all the rules and the guidance, and you are self-approved. You can conduct your operation if you did everything that you're supposed to do. The COA that Jeff alluded to earlier, the online portal, the certificate of authorization, the 7711-1 and 2 that you have to submit, goes to Washington only. That is not handled at the local FAA office. None of us at the local offices have been trained yet on how to process any of these documents. We'll do the best we can to direct you to the place that you need your information, which is basically back to FAA/UAS. Everything is on that website. But your approvals come directly out of Washington through that portal process. Turnaround times right now are said to be 90 days. I think Jeff has learned how to streamline it. The purpose of our networking group here in the city is to be able to compare how to fill the application out, how to verbalize your request the correct way so that you minimize the rejections or the do-overs that you have to do. But again, the tower itself is not going to approve anything. You've got to come in and do it legitimately, and they will accept the information or process the information, but they will not be telling you that you're cleared to do that particular flight.
I always find it interesting. I guess it goes back to my having a law degree, where if you when you read the verbiage, the tower personnel has the ability, or at least the authority, and again, this is just my interpretation. I don't make policy, and I'm not interpreting for the FAA here. I'm just giving you my personal opinion. Is the FAA tower staff, the air traffic control guy, doesn't have any authority to approve you as a drone operator, whether you're recreational or commercial, but they do have the authority to deny you, because they're there to keep people safe in the sky. So if you're unsafe, yeah, they can deny you, but they're not there to approve you. If you want to get approval as a commercial operator, you go through the web portal, through the FAA central office, and you work through that process. If you're a recreational person, it's on you to make sure you're safe. If they don't deny you, that it doesn't mean you're safe, it just means you're not interfering with any direct operations that puts posing an imminent threat. The duty is still on you as a recreational flyer. You satisfied your legal requirement to notify, and when you notify, there is no approval. It's just notifying, right? So the tower guy, when you get that call, you're going to say, okay, I've been notified. I got it down, right? Be safe.
Yeah, what you just said is, I think, in so many words, what I meant to say. So thank you for that.
That's perfect, yeah.
That's exactly right. When we get those phone calls, it's I don't want to say awkward, but that's exactly it. They have a responsibility to notify me, but you're not asking me for approval, and nor am I going to give you that approval. It's not going to work out quite that way. However, I have denied a few people myself, and I had one guy actually get pretty argumentative about it, and he couldn't understand why flying directly under a 1.5 mile final, why I wouldn't let him fly up to 400 feet. I said no, and he said, well, what if I keep it under 300? I said no. I said, why don't you keep it under the roof line of your house, and maybe we can talk on a couple mile final. But you're at this point, you're so close to the airport that if that thing, if you get a bad wind or something, an updraft, and that thing goes up 150 feet, then it would pose an imminent danger to arriving and departing aircraft. So the answer was no, and he was not happy. But at the same time, we can't accept that amount of risk. And myself, the FAA, nobody is going to want to do that, and we will not do it.
So then that poses the question, if you're a recreational flyer and if you call the tower to notify them as you're legally required, and that answer is going to be no, then you don't make the call. And then you go out there and you claim ignorance and say, I didn't know. And that's why you can Google drone footage in Balboa Park, and you're going to see drone footage right now on the internet of guys that are flying over Balboa Park directly into the path of the leading into Lindbergh Field. You could probably do the same thing in Coronado, in Point Loma, or out in the lagoon in Coronado. I mean, not Coronado, but Carlsbad, right? Because there are places where you got more visual attractive, they're almost attractive nuisances, right? And drone guys and gals are going to want to get those images because they are going to use them for commercial purposes, or they like the bragging rights of what they got. They know the answer is I can't fly there, so they don't make the call. That's one of our biggest problems. The other thing is on the commercial side, we've educated people enough to know they're not recreational, so they got to go through the process, but they're social dissidents. I need that money. I got that deal. My guy's not going to wait for 90 days for me to get approval, so I'm going to go out there and do it because I know I'm safe. Well, you're out there running naked because you're totally liable and you're not safe, and the San Diego Police Department has the right to now cite you for flying that drone over the Midway or down in the gas lamp district or wherever you are in that controlled B airspace. So just be warned. If they don't catch you doing it, they'll catch you on the internet because as you display the illegal footage.
All right. Well, I think we've covered a lot of really good stuff. What else?
That's not a downer.
No, it's fine. I mean, this is all one of those things where,
Steve can tell you there of the incidents. So you told me one where a guy from Southwest reported a drone above him while he was on final, right? Yeah. And Lindbergh, I think about the guys above you.
Yeah, that's crazy.
737 or whatever he was flying.
It scares me to death to see that because, what's to stop you from going down to Balboa Park and just flying your drone? Well, that's right right there. I mean, we all know how cool it looks to be driving down the 163 and, have British Airways coming over you at 250 feet or whatever. I mean, yeah, it looks cool. I get it, and it's got right there. You have some of the best views of the entire city, the bay, all of it. I mean, what are you going to do? Tell people, cool, you bought a drone in America's finest city and no, you can't fly it or get any image. Of course they're going to do it, and then that's it. They have businesses to run. They have websites to produce. They have content to make. They have whatever. I mean, I don't know what people do with all of it, but it's
I'm sure
they're going to do it.
There's had to be a lot of illegal operators down for the Big Bay Barge 4th of July down there, right? They're flying at night. They're recreational. They're in controlled airspace. There's a lot of people out watching. Fortunately, we didn't have any incident, and we didn't have any incident at Comic-Con this year either. So, just by the fact there's no incidents, I would say our San Diego Police Department are doing a good job.
I would agree. And, for anybody out there that's interested in that type of stuff too, watch the Comic-Con footage and see if any drone stuff starts coming out. I'm curious over the next couple weeks. What other points? I mean, we can probably do a little bit of contact info type stuff, last points, last whatevers you want to do. I mean, you've already alluded to being okay to be a contact for some of this stuff. I'm not going to give out your phone number at the FSDO scene, but
go see Jay. Jay, now we'll bring Jay in.
But is there any last kind of tie-in points or tie-up or wrap-up the loose ends points you guys wanted to make?
Well, just that the formation of this safety team group was to help assist the huge volume of calls that were coming into the FSDO. The group themselves, being on the leading edge of the happening here, have been instrumental in being a place to send folks for the education outreach. It's changing so fast, and our guys are just flooded with their daily workload that they have to do for pilot certification, all the different investigations and certification processes that they've got to go through. So their time is very valuable. It's hard for them to be able to pick up a phone, and normally an inquiry is going to last an hour and a half sometimes before a person, especially a new person, has been briefed adequately, and even that's only a beginning. So the technique of establishing this group, this networking, this ability to have a place to come and ask your questions is paramount, I think, to making this work out, and to help the people who are entering into the field to get a place to go to get it started. So that's I'm eternally grateful to Jeff and to all the people that he's been able to pull together for the outreach and their ability to be able to receive people and to get them pointed in the right direction.
I appreciate the opportunity because as a guy who came in with no aviation experience a couple of years ago, I feel accepted by the aviation community. And I would like to, put out a request that if someone has a facility in the North County around McClellan Airport at Palomar, we'd like to expand our drone-free seminar opportunities to our friends up in the North County, because it's difficult to get down to San Diego Central, Montgomery Field, on a Wednesday evening during a regular weekday. And we know that there's a big demand and a lot of interest up in North County, particularly in the Carlsbad tech area. So we'd like to venture up there, and having a facility, as we're also part of the San Diego Aviation Association of Safety Counselors, which is a not-for-profit organization. So as a not-for-profit, if we could use a facility for public education and reach out on a monthly basis to help the people in North County the same way we're doing it in Central, then I'd also extend the opportunity that if someone has an event or an organization in anywhere else in the county, South Bay, East County, we're happy to come out with our presentation, do a demonstration, handouts, educate however we can. The more we disseminate the information and help people fly safe, I think the security of the sport as a recreation is going to live beyond us, and we can transition this as safely possible. A lot of times I use the analogy that Well, when you went from horse and buggy to automobile, I'm sure that transition didn't go very well, and a lot of people were upset with the government because they didn't move fast enough, or that they were moving too fast and they were taking too much ground. And you had things like automobiles with wagon wheels because the technology doesn't integrate overnight. So we're doing pretty darn good, and for a government organization, my hat's off to the FAA because they are moving along this pretty fast considering they are a government organization.
You know, yeah, that all of that is true. And this is the kind of thing where this is such a new thing and it's moving so fast that anybody that wants to get involved in helping this and ease the transition, I think would be welcome. This is a whole new group of aviators that's going to, this is appealing to a different generation. Very, very young children. My 6-year-old's already been asking for a drone for almost 2 years. Whereas the idea of a model airplane, okay, maybe, or maybe I'll fly later. But if you can fly with an iPhone, I think it appeals to a much broader group of people. And it's kind of a quick fix, too. I mean, we talked about attending private pilot schools. We talked about attending seminars, doing your research and so on. But at the end of the day, you can really just order one of these or go down to the store and buy one. And it just takes as long as the batteries take to charge until you're really up and running, which is kind of the fun part, but also kind of the scary part for most of us that are already here. But okay, well, this has been really, really, really great information. And I know that we're going to continue this as a theme throughout the podcast in the future. So I hope that as things develop, that we'll see both of you guys back on the show again. And between now and then, how can people get a hold of you guys for questions, comments, concerns, anything like that?
Well, I'm happy to put my email out there, Jeff@empoweruav.com. That's EMPOWERUAV.com, or my phone number, 619-990-1640. In between missions of out doing solar projects or doing marketing projects or real estate, or we're also involved in the agricultural business, we try to stay abreast on the latest sensors because, yeah, flying the aircraft's fun, but the data you collect is where the money is, right? What's the data worth? And the more sophisticated the data, the more challenging it is sometimes, and the more lucrative it is. And we're not really secretive about what we do. We're happy to share it, but we're also running as fast as we can to stay ahead of you, too.
And for FAA-type inquiries, you can call the San Diego Flight Standards District Office at 858-502-9882. Dial extension 3, that'll be the operations side. And in all likelihood, we're going to send you back over to Jeff because he's got the time, energy, and expertise to be able to answer your question in detail. But we'll get you pointed in the right direction. And the trick is to be conservative, be safe, think about other users that are around you. Think about, from the privacy perspective, think about whether your neighbors are going to be happy with you flying up and over their heads. And I would also make sure that as an operator, you're not doing this solo, but you have a visual observer or some other individual standing alongside of you, because there are instances where people have confronted a pilot while his vehicle is up in the sky, and sometimes it hasn't been a pleasant experience. And if you don't have a partner standing there to diffuse the situation a little bit, you're going to be in for a shocker, and you could lose your machine. So don't do these things by yourself. Make sure you've got at least somebody standing with you.
Wow, well, that was quite a talk, and I really look forward to hearing from you guys about what you all think about this topic. If you want to leave a comment, you can do it in audio format as usual, or you could simply email me, or like and leave a comment on the Patreon page, or the Facebook page, or if you're flying by, VHF is great. But no matter what method you choose, I'll do my best to get your stuff on the show. If you have suggestions for future show topics or individuals you'd like me to interview, maybe social media you'd like me to share, send it on in. If you want to get in touch with me, check out the website. It's podcastingonaplane.com. There, you're going to find links to all the social media. You can follow me on Twitter at podcastonaplane. My Instagram is podcastingonaplane, and you can use that as a hashtag. If you're liking what you're hearing, the best way to keep up is to subscribe. You can do that through iTunes or Stitcher. And if you don't have any of those, you can go straight to shoutengine.com, which is my web host, and stream it straight from there. Subscriptions and ratings make all the difference in podcast land, so I ask that you please subscribe. You'll get new episodes automatically that way, as soon as I release them. Well, that's all for now. Thanks again for listening. Your frequency change is approved until next time, and report back on this frequency for the next episode. Good day. The Podcasting on a Plane podcast is presented for entertainment purposes only. My comments and those of my guests, the website's content, and any of the social media, etc., are not part of my official responsibility as a controller or an FAA employee. The views and opinions you hear on the podcast are mine and those of my guests, and not necessarily that of the FAA. There is no nexus between Podcasting on a Plane and the FAA. Also, while I am a CFI, I'm not your CFI. Nor am I your mechanic, your doctor, your shrink, or your spouse. This podcast is presented for entertainment, camaraderie, and fun, but is in no way, shape, or form professional advice. It's not legal counsel, and it's definitely not flight instruction. If you are in need of professional advice, get some from somewhere more appropriate than a podcast, no matter how good this one may be.